is a problem that we've become aware of in the oceans, but of course most of the solutions lie on land.
All those years in the BBC being told that people just want to be entertained isn't the case, because who'd have thought that a film about plastic pollution would end up as the #1 documentary on Netflix?
And we need, if we want to solve the problem, just to reduce drastically, not a bit, not marginally, not slow down. We need to absolutely reduce the mass of plastic we are producing.
And very much welcome to the third Environmental Frontline event, curated and organised by Luke Douglas-Hume of Clear Public Space and Pranvera Smith of the acclaimed Frontline Club. At these events, we address and investigate the burning environmental issues of the day, from waste incineration to overfishing, and now, today, plastics in our oceans, looking at whether it's possible to turn the tide. It's the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science this year, and at the moment, ocean science points to the fact that the plastic in our oceans tide is actually going the wrong way. Around about 2050, estimates suggest, the mass of plastic will exceed the mass of fish. So, Richard, we're going to move to you first.
So I'm Richard Thompson. I'm Professor of Marine Biology based at the University of Plymouth. I didn't imagine that plastic in the oceans was something I was going to be spending my career on when I trained as a marine biologist. I thought it was going to be about whales and dolphins and coral reefs and all the kind of wonders of the ocean that, of course, had inspired me as a child, from Jacques Cousteau and David Attenborough. But actually what I found as I was training to be a scientist was that I'd got litter arriving in the experiments I was conducting literally every day, most of it plastic. And it was that got me hooked. Back in the early 90s, nobody was looking at small bits of plastic. They weren't recorded, they weren't picked up, they weren't part of beach surveys. And yet it struck me they were the most numerous. And so I set some students the challenge. I said, go and find me the smallest bits. That initial question led to the first paper describing microplastics, using the term microplastics in the ocean, that we published in 2004. You know, this is a problem that we've become aware of in the oceans, but of course most of the solutions lie on land. You know, the kind of strap line to the Decade of the Ocean is the science we need for the oceans we want. It's clear to me that there's evidence of harm. We could look at economic harm, look at the cost we spend up in cleaning, not all of our coastlines, but just the bits that are economically valuable. Ports, harbours, estimated in the US $500 million every year, cleaning up just the parts of the West Coast that are economically important. There's also clear evidence of influence on human health and well-being. We go to the seaside, it normally makes us feel good. It doesn't take much litter to significantly depress that feel-good factor from nature. And of course, then finally, the very well-documented accounts on wildlife. Over 700 species known to encounter plastic. Many of those encounters harmful. Now, some would argue that we still have evidence gaps about the problem, and we do. But I guess the key question, it's a philosophical question, is really, are those evidence gaps so substantial that they hold us back from moving towards solutions? And I have had that argument put to me once by a policymaker who perhaps didn't want to spend public funds on the issue, that we needed to wait until you scientists had really got your act together to prove the harm. There are definitely unknowns, and some of my team and others are working on those, and they relate to questions about which is the most important source. They relate to questions about what might be the harmful effects of nanoplastics that we're only really beginning to start to describe. What are the effects on human health of ingesting, not the well-being, not the psychological effects? We've certainly got questions about all of those things. But the question I'd put to you is, are those unknowns sufficient to hold us back? You know, we know broadly that it's about reduce, reuse, recycle. Is it about a plastic-free aisle? In my view, no, it's not, because that could lead to food wastage at levels that would increase the environmental issues associated with food wastage. Is it about banning some items like a drinking straw or the throwaway carrier bag? Quite probably. Where does recycling fit in? Where does cleanup fit in? Is it about stopping the litter getting into the sea in the first place? So we need, in short, much better evidence to allow policy and industry to reach the right decisions about what to do about the problem. We're jumping for solutions. And I see industry and policy jumping at something that might not necessarily address the problem. And I worry in some cases that without the evidence, we could inadvertently make things worse. So in summary, I would say in terms of the UN decade, we need to recognize that these gaps, these evidence gaps, although the problem is in the oceans as it concerns us, the evidence gaps are not necessarily in the oceans. We need to consider science around the solutions and the issues in parallel. And we need to look at the trade-offs to focus on the most tangible solutions. The only way we can do that is bringing the disciplines together. We need funding instruments that actually allow social scientists, environmental scientists, those working on legal frameworks to work together on the issue. So that's all I've got to say. I think there are solutions, but at the moment, we're not necessarily addressing it in completely the right way. Thank you.
Richard, I'm going to come back to you a little bit later when everyone's spoken and ask a single question, which is your opinion on the adequacy of DEFRA in responding to this issue so far. But for now, we're going to move on to Joe.
I'm Jo Ruxton. I'm the founder of Plastic Oceans UK, which has recently rebranded, and we're now Ocean Generation in preparation for my new film and to fit in with the UN Decade of Ocean Science. So I started looking at this issue in 2009. I'd been working at the BBC Natural History Unit for the previous 12 years. Making underwater documentaries. The first series I worked on was Blue Planet. What I found was that we were portraying the oceans as if they were full of life and pristine, and all of the problems that I knew about because of my previous work in marine conservation with WWF was not coming across in our documentaries. And I wanted to do something about that because I felt that we had a duty to tell people the truth. I left the BBC to make my own documentary and looking at the topics that I wanted to cover. And it was around that time that I met somebody who started talking about the phenomenon of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And this sounded like something that would be good to film. It was described as a continent-sized floating island of plastic in the North Pacific Ocean. I couldn't see any pictures of it. I also wondered why, if it was that big, the astronauts in the space station weren't beaming back pictures to us. The scientist in me wanted facts rather than sensationalism. So I managed to get onto a ship that was going out there, and it was a research ship, to do a recce for the film. We were just not finding this huge floating mass of plastic. But what was happening was the microplastics. What looked like beautiful clean water was full of these tiny particles, but that was nothing because the closer we got to the center, each trawl that we pulled up was absolutely choked with these things. But then I started to learn about the chemicals that leach from and adsorb onto plastics in the ocean and how these are going up the food chain. And of course, we're top predators on that food chain. That was how the film started off. It was another 8 years of working on it. And during that time, we traveled around the world. We went to 20 different locations and we went from the developed nations that are sending their plastic to the developing ones and saw exactly what it was doing there. One of the islands that we filmed on called Tuvalu, these are people that have so much plastic waste on this little island, nowhere to put it. They can no longer fish in their lagoon where they used to. Their villages, they're just drowning in plastic and they're burning it all the time. And there were so many people with coughs and the cancer levels were really high. And also in Malaysia, where UK is still sending a lot of their plastic, the rivers there are just full of it because we send it off thinking, well, we put it in the recycling thinking we're doing the right thing, but everything gets sent to these countries and they can recycle the PET and that's the most valuable, but a lot of it can't be recycled at the moment, and certainly the layered plastics, the sachets and so on, and the rivers are just full of them. And it's heartbreaking to see what's happening. I have been amazed at how many people do want to know about this and want to do something about it. All those years in the BBC being told that people just want to be entertained isn't the case, because who'd have thought that a film about plastic pollution would end up as the #1 documentary on Netflix.
So let's move on now to Helmut.
Yes, I would say actually probably the most uncivilized vertebrate on this planet is called the human being. I don't know any other species who, to such an extent as the human being, ruthlessly ruins the environment that it is in and lives in. Only within 13 years, more than half of all plastic ever produced was produced during the last 13 years. The trouble is with the plastic in the marine environment is a bit like in climate change. People, the average, well, the man on the street doesn't see it. And when you dive down to the Marion ditch, 11,000 meters under the sea level, then what do you find? PET bottles and other plastic, but PET bottles have been found there. The future is that industry claims it would be sustainable if we go on with 4% annual growth in plastic production, would be moderate. It's unfortunately not moderate because it leads to exponential growth. And if you apply mathematics, you find out that in 17.5 years, the given mass at a given year doubles. It doubles every 17.5 years. And since plastic is a short-lived material, it doesn't take long until it becomes waste. So the problem is we produce too much of that material, and we need, if we want to solve the problem, just to reduce drastically, not a bit, not marginally, not slow down. We need to absolutely reduce the mass of plastic we are producing. Reduce does not belong to the vocabulary of people who believe in growth. And people who believe in growth don't know what they talk about. What we urgently would need was a discussion about qualitative growth versus quantitative growth. So we want growth, we need growth for many reasons, that's for sure, but we need to get away from quantitative growth. And I would say the biggest exporter of plastic waste is the United States. The second biggest exporter of plastic waste is the United Kingdom. I don't know whether you are aware, but this is quite dreadful, exporting to developing countries. The United Kingdom was in 2020 about 7.1 million tons. That's not acceptable. It's a human rights violation to transport unrecyclable plastic waste to the Philippines, to Vietnam, to any other developing country in transition. On the policy side, we have done a lot in the European Union, but they are marginally turning the tide. So marginally that I would say they have close to zero effect. If we would have a landfill ban in all countries of the world, we wouldn't talk about the problem at this magnitude as we have it today. We need to understand that it's not about more recycling. It is about a total shift in mindset of understanding that we need to go away from quantity to quality. This shift we must do, which means we need to design products entirely differently.
There's a couple of points in there that I would pick on if I was a listening journalist. One of them was the suggestion, if I heard you correctly, that the export of plastic waste is a human rights issue, and that by implication, Britain and possibly other European countries could be breaching the human rights of those in developing countries by exporting plastic there.
Exporting plastic waste, which is not absolutely clean and sorted and fit for immediate recycling, cannot be exported. The Basel Convention. And we had the courage to say what we have collected for recycling, that counts to our recycling target, which was a lie. And then we have exported it to the third world as recycled material. In reality, it was 90% of material that was unrecyclable. So it was a dumping action, in actual fact, a strong entity throwing stuff to be dumped on a weak entity and their environment that is in violating human rights.
There are some questions coming through on the Q&A. A common theme to some of them being regarding fishing and the impact of the release of plastics by fishing vessels. Put it in context, how big a component, as it were, is fishing releases of the overall volumes?
If you look at the types of litter on shorelines worldwide, sort of average it out, about 40 to 50% of it you can attribute towards single-use items, but it varies, like packaging, not fishing nets, but it varies immensely from one place to another. If you look around parts of the UK, you'll find there are areas where fishing related debris is absolutely the number one. If you look in some parts of the Mediterranean, the main item you find is cigarette butts. So it varies from place to place. But overall, I would say that single-use packaging is one of the most abundant things. We shouldn't kid ourselves that this is just a problem related to the fishing industry. Most of it is packaging.
So when you look at DEFRA and when you look at our politicians and the way they've responded to this, what do you see?
I see an incredible desire from policymakers to introduce the right implements. In my view, what we're missing in some places is the evidence, the specific evidence about how to apply what policy in which circumstances. Whatever agency you're working with, if you're going to introduce a policy, there is going to be somebody that's going to suffer from that. Some industry, some sector of society is going to be challenged by it. And that's why it's really, really important to have robust evidence to sit behind those policies, to inform them, to make sure that on balance, we're seeing a better outcome for the environment. The scientists like myself spend too long working out what the problem is and not enough time trying to help find the solutions. And we've got to try and short circuit that. We've got to try and work on solutions in parallel to the problems, because you can't rely on policy to come up with all those answers. They need the evidence base around some of those answers. And I think that's what's lacking. So I'm not going to say that policy is intransigent. I'm not going to criticize, because I think we need more evidence. I'd like to see evidence about a revision of the waste hierarchy, because we talk about reduce, reuse, recycle as though, you know, they're in a nice incremental order. And I don't know, there's one unit between them. But I would see reduce in terms of as a priority as being an order of magnitude above, let's say, recycle. You know, just saying reduce, reuse, recycle, it isn't enough any longer.
Sorry, we're getting some very interesting questions coming in on the topic of biodegradable plastics. And I'm going to come to you first on this, Jo.
It's interesting because sometimes just the word degradable seems to make people think that it's better, but actually anything will degrade. A plastic bottle will degrade. Biodegradable is a bit of a minefield. There's a trend for a while, which you're still seeing, of mixing plastic with plant materials. When it goes into the marine environment or into the natural environment, it looks as if it's breaking down, and that's the plant material breaking down. And then you're left, of course, with all the pieces of plastic, which will blow into oceans and storm drains and everything else much more easily. My view is we've got to start valuing things. Why do we have to have this convenience of single use? I think we've actually got to look at our lifestyles and this idea of convenience. We've got to start washing up again. You know, we've got to think of the end of life of these things. And I don't think that biodegradable ones are the answer. The biodegradable thing does just as much harm to marine life because it's been made so well. And yes, eventually it might biodegrade, but in the meantime, it can certainly get stuck in a turtle's gut or you know, harm a seabird. It's just not the answer in my view.
I now agree with Jo Rexton that biodegradable plastic doesn't solve the problem we are talking about. And even the biodegradable plastic industry does not claim to have the silver bullet. Biodegradable plastic is, however, quite an important and interesting material for certain applications where it fits. But in relation to the magnitude of the problem we have been talking about, this is close to nothing, you know. And actually, as Jo Rexton also said, that biodegradable plastic biodegrades under certain circumstances and in certain timeframes, and that bears the risk that if you label something biodegradable and people are not scientists about polymer science, they may see, oh, biodegradable, and they may get confused. It's like throwing an apple in nature. It's also biodegradable, and they think, oh, it's the same. Huh? It's not the same, of course. Huh? And be very, very careful not to get greenwashing through biodegradability. There we have to be very alert.
This isn't about not using plastics. It's a different discussion. The use of plastics, which undeniably brings benefit, is not directly coupled to the environmental damage that we see. So it is possible to change our ways. It's not about not using them. It's about starting to use them more smartly. Unfortunately, we've had 50 years of research and development towards linear use, most of it through very short-lived applications. Fossil oil and gas, short-lived packaging application, waste, waste, waste. And I also would say if we can't get it right with plastics, where we've got that opportunity, what hope do we face with the other environmental challenges?
And what I do witness is policy development, which has some tiny little elements of working on the fringes to improve things. And what I do not see, and that makes me so pessimistic, is a policy development that understands that we need a paradigm shift away from the consumption habits we have, take, make, throw away, to understand that applying our waste management thinking to the world is no longer viable. You know, we talk about the waste hierarchy. We should talk about a product hierarchy. We should have a hierarchy saying what is the biggest virtue for a product, and the second biggest, and the third, and the least. And that producers need to take ownership of their raw materials. They need to go through their raw materials from the beginning to the end, thus avoiding that we will not have waste anymore. And we need to get waste out of the world. And for that, we need to change our thinking from waste thinking to product thinking. We need to think all the problems we face from a product perspective, and to search for the solution from the product perspective. So if I produce something and remain the owner, the material gets back to me. If I know the material gets back to me, I think twice how I design the material, because I don't want rubbish coming back to me. I want something valuable coming back to me. And then I close the circle. I do not close a circle by waffling about closing a circle and introducing some charges here, some changes there, and circular, and sustainable, which does neither mean one nor the other. Anything. I need to put tangible elements in the game, and this is make the producer responsible from the cradle to the cradle. I'm also pessimistic because we still haven't understood that what we need if we want to make the thing go and work, we need a tax reform. We need to stop taxation of work, of labor. That's ridiculous. We need to tax where the tax belongs, and that is the raw material use. And if that is the case, then we internalize externalities. Then there is no cheap plastic anymore that anyone dares to throw away, because plastic then has a value.
Just in the 12 years that I've been working in this, when we started, there were no green groups interested in this. We tried to get collaboration. All they were doing was cleaning beaches. And to me, that is just dealing with it, with the end of it. You've got to start at the beginning. Now, when I go to schools, they know so much. They will not stand for the school shop selling water in plastic bottles. They just won't buy it. And I think that they are such incredible ambassadors for the ocean, and everything makes sense. And that's exactly what you said just now, Helmut, was common sense. You get that with kids. They don't have to think about the economy and where it's going to go. They actually see it in black and white. Why on earth are we doing this when it does that much damage? So I have a lot of hope for the future because of the changes I see, because of the work that we do with kids. I used to think that it's all very well educating them, but you've got to wait for them to get into positions of power or become policymakers to make those changes happen. I don't think that at all now. I've seen them embarrass their parents. I've seen them embarrass their teachers into it, and really making them change their behavior.
I think we should use our democratic power that we have as citizens and encourage our politicians to understand that we're all in one game on the whole globe, and that they need to cooperate worldwide with everybody on this issue, and in particular with the third world countries, provide technology, provide know-how, go there, cooperate, stop sending your waste there, whoever does that, it's not only the UK, it's many others, and cooperate to solve the problem. If we do not cooperate, that is the key. If we do not cooperate, we will not solve the problem.
I think the point I'd like to make is that recycling is not the answer with plastic. It's not a perpetual process. It's actually downcycling. So using something because you say, well, it's okay, I'm going to recycle it at the end, is not the answer. And nor is adding recycled content to new plastic, because that will cut the number of times that it can be recycled even further. So recycle needs to be going way down the waste hierarchy.
I think it's about taking responsibility, and I think that's for all of us, but I think it's particularly for, industry in design and extended producer responsibility, and it's about governments, for creating the right circumstances for industry to take those initiatives. A level playing field, I think Helmut referred to it. We've all got to take responsibility. But you know, you look at the example of the microbeads in cosmetics. We're now seeing bans on those. The patent was filed 50 years ago. Did nobody in any industry using those microbeads in cosmetics ever ask the question or think responsibly about where the hell are they all going? We have to take responsibility from the design stage. We can't wait for environmental science to reveal the problems and then act. We all need to be more responsible.